the damage that is being done, it's not like just everything's going to go back to how it was if Donald Trump climbed down this second.
We are in the middle of the most uncertain economic period, certainly since the pandemic, arguably actually since the financial crisis. I really don't think we can underestimate the uncertainty of how this might play out.
Unless you are absolutely of the tiny quintessential MAGA cheerleading group, you do not think he's doing the right thing with the economy. I think Donald Trump has achieved the impossible at this point, and he's made Liz Truss look quite competent.
I don't want anything to go down, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something. And we have such a horrible, we have been treated so badly by other countries because we had stupid leadership that allowed this to happen. They took our businesses, they took our money, they took our jobs, they moved it.
That is Donald Trump on Air Force One, almost quoting the words of a previous Conservative Chancellor in this country: if it isn't hurting, it isn't working. And boy, has Donald Trump got one thing right. It's certainly hurting. The world markets are in absolute turmoil, and predictions of recession are growing ever louder.
Yeah, one of the biggest voices on Wall Street, the banker from JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, has warned that this trade war now risks recession and higher prices. The trouble is, many in Trump's own cabinet are starting to agree with him. So will he hold his nerve, or will he back down? Welcome to the Newsagents.
Mondays are always a struggle, but this one's going to be a real uphill battle.
Carnage, panic, bloodbath doesn't even begin to cut it.
And markets are bracing for another major sell-off this morning on Wall Street as economies across the globe settle in for President Trump's tariff reality.
The DAX in Frankfurt is down more than 6.5% currently. The FTSE 100 down around 5%. And the index in Paris down nearly 6% in early trading.
We come back to you with some more breaking news as we continue to follow the futures market as it just opened about 56 minutes ago, and it is in deep red territory right now.
It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And just to take you through that horror show.
That happy Monday morning feeling.
That happy Monday
Black
morning.
Monday.
Japan down 9% in the first 30 minutes of trading. Hong Kong's Hang Seng plunged 8.7%. A circuit breaker was activated on South Korea's market. Singapore down 8.5%. London down massively. The CAC 40 in Paris down massively.
You just wanted to say CAC 40, didn't you? You were just looking for an excuse to say CAC 40.
Oui, mais bien sûr, évidemment. And so wherever you looked, everything was in the red.
$9.5 trillion worth of global equity value wiped out in 3 days, according to Bloomberg. Nearly 10 trillion, not billion, trillion dollars worldwide. Orange Monday rather than Black Monday.
Yeah, and as we were saying, JP Morgan's head, Jamie Dimon, has said that this now risks tipping the US economy into recession, driving prices higher. But he says, and I think this is the most fundamental bit, that it risks undermining the country's long-term alliances. In other words, at the bottom of all this, people are still somehow searching for a plan, for a rationale. And at the moment, it's not really making sense, even inside Trump's own head, because either he has come to the table spreading these tariff numbers, you know, as we said, like sort of economic diarrhea all over the globe, waiting for people to come to him to negotiate, in which case he wants the tariffs to disappear because people are negotiating, or else he wants to see jobs returning to America, people moving their factories to America, planning things long term in America, in which case, well, the prices aren't going to come down for consumers and the tariffs are going to have to stay. So which is it? Because at the moment there is no clarity, there is no coherence to what he's actually trying to do. Jobs to America or lower prices for consumer or better, you know, America power? Because all it sounds at the moment is a sort of broadly vindictive strategy on the rest of the world, which is going to hurt America badly too.
Emily, I think the huge mistake you're making there is applying a rational analysis to all of this, because I think that if you are doing things on the basis of rationality, you would have said, right, the rest of the world, you've got a month before I do this, and this is why I would do it. and then you can come to me over the course of the next 4 weeks, or the US Trade Representative, which is the normal office that deals with it, come to me with your counter offer of what you're going to do, and then we will talk about it. But you've got a month or 3 months. What you've done is acted unilaterally. You've sent the markets into free fall. The damage that is being done, it's not like just everything's going to go back to how it was if Donald Trump climbed down this second. That won't happen. Donald Trump has done things in such a ridiculous way because he wanted this big performative moment when these tariffs would come in. He would stand there with his board and, you know.
That's fine. That's fine if you're Donald Trump, because you can kind of say whatever you want. But he is sending out surrogates to try and explain what he's doing. And that is where the cracks are starting to appear. Elon Musk, who before last week was so tied to him he brought his own child into the Oval Office on his shoulders. Elon Musk is now saying we need to get back to a place of free trade. Elon Musk sells cars. He understands the damage that is being done to American businesses. Peter Navarro is knocking down Elon Musk. Peter Navarro is the guy who is arguably the most influential in setting these tariffs alongside Donald Trump. And so you're already seeing these really interesting rifts open up between people who have basically been sent out to interpret Donald Trump's word, may not agree with him, may not agree with each other, and don't know what story they are trying to tell.
Well, why don't we just play the clips of first Elon Musk saying, I want free trade, and then Pete Navarro, both of these people, critical figures in the Trump White House, completely disagreeing with each other.
I'm hopeful, for example, with the tariffs, that at the end of the day, I hope it is agreed that both Europe and the United States should move, ideally, in my view, to a zero tariff situation, effectively creating a free trade zone between Europe and North America. That would be that's what I hope occurs.
It was interesting to hear Elon Musk at the beginning talk about a zero tariff zone with Europe. He doesn't understand that. And the thing that's, I think, important about Elon to understand, he sells cars. That's what he does.
He sells cars.
He does. He's not wrong.
Well, he used to.
Yeah. Not as many as he used to. Yeah. Look, I think one of the most fascinating things about, the last 72 hours, just on the politics rather than the economics, and the economics is so massive, but on the politics, is to watch in real time the slow dawning realization for the American plutocrat billionaire class that they've backed, I'm almost supposed to say the wrong horse, but it's not as if the horse ever tried to hide anything from them. It was always very clear what Trump wanted to do and what his economic strategy was. What there was is a complete actual mismatch between the billionaire class who backed him and actually the policy agenda and prospectus that he espoused. Because who has benefited most from globalization? Who has benefited most from the extended supply chains, the driving down in costs in global markets for goods? It is precisely that billionaire American class. And yet they have basically made the mistake of believing that Trump was not serious about what he was planning to do on tariffs. They thought that what they were in for was a bit like Trump 1. Loads of deregulation, loads of tax cuts, maybe some tariffs and protectionism on the side they can live with. What they have witnessed over the last 72 hours, as we were saying all last week, is a reshaping of the global economic order as we've known it, and the biggest supply shock, the biggest trade shock, arguably in history, even bigger than the 1930s, because in the 1930s, trade as a percentage of GDP, American economy, was way smaller than it is now. So we are watching the unravelling in real time of this political alliance between these billionaires and Trump, but also the unravelling of the economic order as we've known it.
Well, on the S&P 500, and we're recording this at 1 o'clock and it hasn't opened yet, but on the futures market, it's scheduled for its biggest 3-day fall in decades. Forget 2008, forget the pandemic. This is worse than all of that. And it's all the actions of one man. It's not an external shock. It's not the bank suddenly kind of having a liquidity crisis. It's not suddenly a global pandemic. It is one man's actions sitting in the Rose Garden with his big board making an announcement with such devastating effect.
And that's why I think actually, I really don't think we can underestimate the uncertainty of how this might play out. Because normally, economists would say normally that tariffs are not necessarily the sort of things that would push your economy into recession. It's the sort of thing that, as long as there's stability with the tariffs, it's the sort of thing that will make things more expensive for producers. It makes the economy less efficient overall because you're potentially deciding to have to buy for more expensive domestic consumers rather than international ones. But there's something Paul Krugman's been talking and writing about, which I think is spot on, the Nobel Prize winning economist. He's been talking about the uncertainty of these particular tariffs. Because unlike normal tariffs, which are imposed and you have a particularly stable tariff regime, with Trump, you don't know, there's no stability to it. It might come, it might go up, it might go down. So if you are an investor, and I think imagine if you're an American investor and, I don't know, you want to open, a new factory making car parts, and you're thinking about where to put them, where to make that investment, what the time horizon should be, what your balance sheet will be over 4 to 5 years. You have not got a clue. We are in the middle of the most uncertain economic period, certainly since the pandemic. Arguably, actually, since the financial crisis. As you say, John, this isn't the result of a sort of long-standing problem which has been building up in the economic system, like the 2008 crash was. This is a deliberate policy decision taken from the White House.
For everyone who's watching the markets on a daily basis, obviously all you see is these incredible sort of crashes, highs and lows, and the volatility. But it's quite interesting that there's one big-time CEO, Bill Ackman, who's actually quite a fan of Trump. He's an American. And his comment today is about the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick. And he said, "I've just figured out why Lutnick is indifferent to the stock market and the economy crashing. He and Cantor, as in Cantor Fitzgerald, are long bonds. He profits when our economy implodes. It's a big idea to pick up a Secretary of Commerce whose firm is levered in long fixed income." You don't need to understand the details of that to understand the gist of what he's saying, which is that the Commerce Secretary, Trump's right-hand man on this whole deal, does not really care what the markets are doing because he has these very long-term fixed positions. And the reason I bring that in is because if you look across the polls at the moment, 63% of Americans, even before the tariffs were brought in, had a very negative view of the government's economic policy. That is the highest figure, this is according to John Byrne Murdoch and the FT, the highest figure since records began almost 50 years ago. So just 25% of US adults say they expect their finances to look better in 5 years than today. That is storing up a major political problem for Trump as well, because in that 63% are a lot of Republicans, or a lot of people who vote for him. You don't get 63% who are just Democrats. You get people who voted Trump into power, who are now looking at what's going on. Unless you are absolutely of the tiny quintessential MAGA cheerleading group, you do not think he's doing the right thing with the economy.
Look, we've got a league table of the billionaires who have lost most over what Donald Trump has done. And that kind of goes back, Liz, to what you were talking about these plutocrats who suddenly kind of find themselves on the wrong end of it. I couldn't give a shit about the plutocrats. They're still going to have plenty of money at the end of it, and they'll still have their private jets and their yachts, and I'm sure they'll be able to put food on the table for their children.
Well, no one please think of the plutocrats.
Exactly. But there are millions and millions of Americans and people in Britain who have kind of planned retirements or whatever, and who are looking at their portfolio of assets, which is what they're going to live on for the next 20, 30 years of their lives, and they're thinking, holy crap, when am I going to get this money back? All my plans are out the window. And I think the key point you made there, Lewis, was about the uncertainty. That, if Donald Trump, let's say Donald Trump wakes up, I mean, he has woken up this morning and he's already been putting stuff on Truth Social, but let's say he wakes up tomorrow morning and has a moment of epiphany where he thinks, God, I've screwed this up. I better reverse course. That we know that there's a possibility that the day after or the day after that, he has another epiphany and says, no, I was right the first time. We go back to tariffs. How can anyone plan with any certainty, whether you are a government, whether you're a businessman, whether you're a householder, that you know what Donald Trump is going to do next? And all you want to do is to have some kind of stability from the leader of the most powerful economy in the world.
That was the key. The key to making this work was to convince business that this was durable, because no one's going to invest in brand new factories or creating goods or moving their whole stock and their whole workforce and their whole investment structure into the US if it could all be upended in a week's time.
Because there was a world where Trump could have unveiled a more targeted package of tariffs, something over and above Trump 1, but not as broad as what we've seen here, which is on everything, everywhere, all at once. And I think the markets would probably have absorbed that because they knew something was coming. I think what has happened here is it is the surprise at how deep and broad the tariffs are and the insistence from Trump that they're not going anywhere. And that's the main question, right? Is do we think that there's a world where if the stock markets keep tumbling, something we know Trump is attuned to, where the American corporate world continues to revolt, does Trump back down? And you can clearly see both scenarios, right? One is that Trump does care about the stock markets, and what he'll do, you could see a world where in 2 weeks' time he basically says, I've got a load of great deals now. They've come crawling to me, the EU, all our trading partners and whatever. And he basically makes up a kind of made-up story about how, in fact, he's managed to extract lots of concessions from other countries and he withdraws from them. The other scenario, though, is, as we were talking about last week, if Trump has one consistent political view, it is that trade deficits with other countries is a problem. And two, there is a more intellectual kind of narrative around Trump and around MAGA, those around him. Maybe he doesn't share it. But they do genuinely, some of those people genuinely see this as a way of not just reindustrializing the Midwest, which we talked about, but as a proper strategic bit of competition with China. They believe that it is a profound problem that the United States has offshored so much of its productive capacity, its strategic productive capacity, to other countries, but to China in particular. And they see this as a long-term way. In fact, they actually see this as the last chance they have to arrest that and to change that. And if they really believe that, and they know that Trump can't run again, that this is their last chance, then maybe they do stick with it.
Well, if they do stick with it, the consequences, I mean, what Jamie Dimon says could be the least of it. You've got to hope that the best case scenario is that Donald Trump kind of wrestles a concession out of the EU on X and on China on Y and Japan and Singapore or whoever else, Vietnam, and he announces that I have pulled off the greatest victory for the American people ever, even though we know it's total bullshit, but it allows him to get off a hook that he has impaled himself on quite deliberately.
I'm going to suggest another better case scenario, if you like, which is at the moment Trump is like the bully that's gone into the school canteen, and instead of finding one little kid in the corner and trying to get Menace's money, lunch money, off that one kid, he's announced to the whole canteen, to the whole school, that he wants all their lunch money. And there is a point at which you start looking at each other and going, what, that one guy wants all our lunch money? Well, why are we all going to give him all our lunch money? It doesn't work if it's not targeted. If it was China, you would target China. If it was somewhere that you felt was an unfair trading partner, you target an unfair trading partner. The fact that it is so sort of smeared over the globe is what actually allows the rest of the globe to turn around and go, sod you. We can think differently. And you've already heard voices like Mark Carney, one of the strongest, voices like Emmanuel Macron, probably the sort of centre of the EU now here, giving us a sense of what that world could look like, where you turn around and go, yeah, you're right, the old school way of thinking is over, we've got to do things our own way. Trump would be furious if there were any kind of consensus between the countries on the outside ganging up on him. And I think that's the really exciting moment to see what happens next.
Just worth adding one thing, because Donald Trump, we started with this clip of Donald Trump on Air Force One, kind of talking about how the appalling way America has been ripped off over the years of bad leadership, pillaged, raped, all the rest of it. America has set the rules of the road for international trade for decades. America in that time has become the wealthiest country in the world by every single metric. It is the reserve currency of the world. Please spare me the rape, the pillage and bondage of the US economy. America is the wealthiest place on earth.
Obviously, the whole world is watching the changes in and instability in global markets, and America's trading partners and its allies, in particular the EU, ourselves, trying to think about and calibrating how we should respond. Keir Starmer and his government seems to be sticking to the course of repeatedly saying we need calm heads and that all options remain on the table. He went to the West Midlands today, the Prime Minister, to articulate a little bit more fully his view of how he believes this new economic world we're entering into is going to work and should work.
And I think the political message is not radically different to one that we've heard before, which is a step away from globalisation and a clear-eyed view of the good it has done, but also the damage it has done, that it has brought gains, but at the expense perhaps of too many communities who saw jobs leaving, who saw deindustrialisation and all the rest of it. And I think he's still at pains to stress that he does believe in free trade. There was quite a few raised eyebrows over the weekend when the speech was trailed that this was the end of globalisation, and you were just like, really? Have you had a chat with Blair about that? Have you had a chat with most of your cabinet about that? Are you really saying that this is sort of the end of free trade as we know it? And of course he isn't. And I think he's very keen to sort of pull away from that. But I also think, reading between the lines, what we are hearing is that a free trade deal, or what do they call it? A prosperity economic deal, I think was the latest form of words we got to, might not be as close as we think it is. That actually I think Starmer might be setting us up to say something's coming, it's in the pipeline with the US, but, not tomorrow, not just yet. And there is one line where he's talking about the importance for the UK to strengthen its trading relationships with others across the globe at the same time. Who does that mean? Does that mean, is it a rapprochement with the EU, or is he saying something much more controversial, which is we're now looking at China a bit more closely? I don't know. I think there's going to be a lot of kind of tea leaf devouring at this point to try and work out what he's really signalling in that.
I could see the headline that Downing Street was after the weekend, globalisation is finished.
Oh, because Trump's just got up.
Yeah. But it was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, because of course globalisation isn't over. We are not going to be opening up factories where they're going to be stitching footballs together or making kind of toys for Christmas, or those things, those elements of the UK economy, such as they were, have gone abroad, and we will continue to import goods depending on what works. And, free trade to some extent will continue in this new environment. Now, what we don't know, going back to our first half, is the uncertainty that Donald Trump leaves. We're still going to be trading, but we saw during COVID the disadvantages of really complex supply lines where you wanted to have PPE and you couldn't get hold of anyone unless you were kind of outbidding another country or another part of the country so that you could get it for your bit of the health service. In America, it was absolutely nuts what was happening there. So I think that bit of it, of course, makes a lot of sense. But we are going to continue to be a trading nation. We're not going to be making everything ourselves. If you look at iPhones being made in China, where they are working 24/7, are we going to have factories in the UK working 24/7 to produce it? Yeah, exactly. It becomes slightly ridiculous to think of it. We are a services economy, and that's still what we're going to largely be, even though at a limited extent I suspect there will be some repatriation of manufacturing jobs in America, but America is not going to become a manufacturing nation in the way that Donald Trump kind of romantically thinks it will, as if it's kind of 1950s Eisenhower America.
I think that what Starmer is saying today, I think it is an evolution on what he and others, including Rachel Reeves, have long said. And if you go back to 2023, Rachel Reeves said globalisation as we once knew it is dead. She said we must care about where things are made and who owns them. There has been a long kind of a long-standing element of the kind of thought within the Starmer project, which took inspiration from Bidenomics, from Joe Biden, again, a president who was very keen on onshoring of global supply chains and so on, and reindustrialization. So Starmer is going a bit further, but I think that the challenge is, that's fine, and what he's articulated in his speech today is basically trying to sort of chart a middle way between sort of Blairite-style globalization, someone who was completely comfortable with globalization, famously in 2005, saying, you can't debate globalization, you might as well debate whether summer follows spring. And at the same time, rejecting the Trump analysis, which is hyper-protectionism and tariffs. Of course, the problem with that kind of middle way is it is, as so often is the case with Starmer, pretty wishy-washy, right? Because you can say, okay, he's saying we still want free trade and we don't want to impose our own tariffs, but at the same time we want to reject globalization as we've known it. And his answer to that is to say that the British state needs to intervene more in the economy, to assist British businesses, to protect businesses and industries from global headwinds. But then the question is, how are you going to do that? And crucially, where is the money going to come from in order to do that, in order to support a really muscular industrial policy? Look what's going on in steel, with British Steel right now, in Scunthorpe and in Port Talbot. There doesn't seem to be any question about nationalising those industries. If you were really serious about charting a new middle course on these things, that's the sort of thing you would have to do. So I worry that in the end, as ever with these things, it ends up being, as often the case with Starmer, a diagnosis without much of a prescription.
What we did hear today is an announcement of a relaxation of environmental rules, make it cheaper and easier to own an electric car. And I think this is somewhere that is going to be one of those kind of one to watch areas, because everything that's happening in the global economy and everything that's coming over at us from the US, Trump not a big fan of environmental causes famously, is pushing Starmer into a new place where he can say, for the sake of growth, which now has to come first, everything else is out the window. I'm not sure how happy Ed Miliband, his Environment Secretary, is about the direction of travel at the moment. And I would say that he is on a sort of watch list now. I mean, we say this periodically about Ed Miliband, don't we? You know, oh, if this gets bad, he'll resign. But I think there is nothing really stopping Starmer from saying, if things carry on getting this bad, and we should say at this point that the first forecasts of what these tariffs at this rate would do to our growth have come out from KPMG over the weekend, and they have forecast a cut in growth by nearly half. So if the forecast was 1.7, it's now 0.8. At this point, if you're Starmer, you're saying, we'll do whatever we can.
Well, we've already started to see the effects, right? This weekend, Jaguar Land Rover, one of the biggest car manufacturers in the UK, huge business, employs tens of thousands of people, particularly in the West Midlands, saying they're going to stop exports.
Yeah, they're suspending it for a while.
To
But
the
so
US.
what's to
So it's
stop
already having an
Starmer
economic
saying, OK, you know what, we said no to North Sea oil drilling, but at this point, even that's off the table. You know, we're in now emergency measures for growth. And I think it's not going to come tomorrow.
No.
But I actually think that he's now in a place where he's kind of going, grown-up government suggests that when you've got an emergency, you know, you do what you have to do.
Well, I think the big question is about the fiscal rules. Because in this situation, in this scenario now, as you say, Emily, with such, and Starmer is saying himself, this is a new economic world. We've just entered a new economic world. There is a lot of speculation, both in Parliament, in the papers, about whether Reeves, certainly by the time you get to autumn, if it looks like if recession is likely, maybe we're already in a recession, that she adjusts the fiscal rules to allow for more borrowing and more spending. Now, I asked Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, about that on my LBC show yesterday. He was completely unequivocal. He said, no way. They're clad in iron, cast in stone.
Well, he did that with us the week before, because that's all he can do.
Of course,
right? Until she breaks them.
Until
but
the
of
rules
course
change.
they're going to break, and of course there's going to be tax raises.
The question then is that actually, conversely, with this, the one benefit to the government of this instability is they could end up, the reason she hasn't wanted to even countenance changing the rules is because, of course, she's worried about the markets getting spooked, having a sterling crash, UK not being able to...
No one's going to notice that now.
Well, more the case that actually one of the few things that could be of a positive to Reeves with this is that already you're seeing huge demand for sovereign debt. Because sovereign debt is the one place, i.e. government borrowing, that is the place that in a time of massive market instability, that is where investors put their money. So it is possible that actually it becomes cheaper over the next 6 months for the UK to borrow. That does allow Reeves to loosen her fiscal rules potentially if she wished.
And look, at moments of maximum kind of economic and political uncertainty, and you think about after COVID, where the sort of borrowing rules completely changed because you had to kind of bail out an economy that had stopped working, and you suddenly have to kind of, help all sorts of industries to stay alive. You can do these things. And I suspect that given the kind of what Donald Trump has done to the economy, the global economy, there will be the space to do that. I mean, of course, there'll be, opponents will leap on it and say you couldn't stick to your rules and and it might come back to haunt them. But they may find they've got no other option if they're going to stop the country going into recession.
I think Donald Trump has achieved the impossible at this point, and he's made Liz Truss look quite competent. I mean, I think that's where we are now, and I think he has given her the space. I mean, the idiotic thing really was that March statement where she said the world has changed. I mean, we talked about this at the time. if you recognise the world has changed and it's about to change in an even bigger, more cataclysmic way, for God's sake, don't just stick to your script.
Yeah.
Don't just sit there going, but I'm going to carry on regardless. Either delay your statement or else understand that a changed world gives you room to think extraordinary things in extraordinary ways.
Problem is, Britain finds itself now as such a bit player in this economic discussion. Because there are basically, in response to what Trump has done, there are two other big economic centres of the world where it really matters in the coming week or two how they choose to respond. China, and in fact they already have, slapping even bigger tariffs on the US, and the EU, which is obviously a massive economic trade bloc. And, there is a lot of discussion at the moment in Brussels about, for example, doing something which has never happened before, not just applying tariffs to American goods like American whiskey, bourbon, all these things that you typically apply tariffs to, but American services. America exports more services to the EU by far than the EU sells to the United States, mainly because of, digital services, tech, Google, you name it, right? All of this stuff. And if the EU were to do that, and there is serious talk about them doing that in retaliation, that would be a massive, massive move. Where is the UK in all of that? We're nowhere, because our economic leverage just doesn't exist in the same way. We're just not part of these conversations. So in terms of how Starmer responds to any of this stuff, it is all pretty small beer. It's all internal UK stuff. Actually, in terms of what we do as part of that wider global economic conversation, we matter far less than we used to.
Well, to go back to Emily's comment about the playground bully walking into the school refectory and saying, right, I want your dinner money, and that the one other solution is that everyone stands up. Well, China have stood up. Europe might stand up, but I think Britain is going to stay in its seat and say, oh, well, yeah, you guys get involved in a bundle if you want to with him, but I think we might just sit this
We're
one
like
out.
Crabbe and Goyle to Trump's Malfoy.
We'll be back in just a moment. And the case of the two Labour MPs who weren't allowed into Israel.
We're going to talk now about the two Labour MPs, two women, who tried to get into Israel, tried to make a visit to the West Bank, the occupied territories, and were stopped in Tel Aviv and held there and ultimately detained, prevented from getting into the country. Abtesam Mohammed and Yuan Yang said that they thought it was vital that they should be allowed as parliamentarians to witness the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory firsthand, and they were told by customs control, border control, that they were intending to spread hate speech against Israel. And this has basically started a furious reaction. David Lammy very much on the side, as you can imagine, of the Labour MPs. Kemi Badenoch weighing in last night, saying that Israel had a right to control its borders. Just listen to her response.
Countries should be able to control their borders. What I think is shocking is that we have MPs in Labour who other countries will not allow through. I think that's very significant.
Shocking because?
Well, if you look at the reasons why the Israeli government has given for why they're not letting them in, they don't believe that they're going to comply with their laws. MPs do not have diplomatic immunity. I believe that the people who represent us in Parliament should be people who should be able to go anywhere in the world and people not be worried about what they're going to do when they go into those countries.
Are you suggesting the Israelis were right to worry that these two Labour politicians would break the law if they got into the country?
Well, that's the reason they gave. And what I believe is that every country should be able to control its borders. We do the same thing. There are many people that we don't allow into our country, and I don't think we should be setting precedents.
Extraordinary stuff.
Extraordinary stuff. I mean, extraordinary that Kemi Badenoch would support the banning of two parliamentarians from going to Israel. I mean, is she similarly relaxed about the fact that there is a ban on various Conservative MPs from going to China or Russia, for that matter? Israel is an ally. It is a democratic country. And I don't know the auspices on which this trip was organised, whether it was an official parliamentary trip. I don't think it was. I think it was the two MPs plus their two researchers going with them. But Israel should have broad enough shoulders that even if those MPs were going to the West Bank to say things that were disobliging about what the Israeli government were doing in the West Bank, you know what? Take it. You're not above criticism. And I think it shows an intolerance and a lack of kind of breadth of vision that Israel has done what it's done.
The Israeli Immigration Ministry is saying that the two MPs were suspected of planning to document the activities of security forces and spread anti-Israel hatred having been rejected. And again, I mean, just to come back to what Badenoch was saying, which yesterday morning I found absolutely astounding. You know, this is a woman who prizes the importance of freedom of speech. And yet she was saying that she felt that Israel was justified, or at least might be considered to be justified in doing what they've been doing, because she said she was not surprised because she had seen the quote-unquote rhetoric emerging from the Labour benches about Israel. And, you know, I mean, even on the same media round, again, I interviewed Richard Fuller, who's the Shadow Chief Secretary of the Treasury. He actually criticised Badenoch for it. I mean, he ended up in a situation of absurdity yesterday where you had other Conservatives basically saying, lining up with David Lammy, saying that this was outrageous, that this shouldn't have happened, against their own leader, Kemi Badenoch.
Because it's Minority Report stuff. I mean, she's not calling them out for anything they've done.
No,
she's calling them out for something, or said, she's calling them out for something that she thinks it's possible for them to perhaps say, according to what Israel thinks they might be about to do. I mean, the whole thing is ludicrous, but I think it is interesting that Israel is not the only country doing this right now, because there's a case going on in Germany right now where they have tried to deport Palestinian sympathisers. There's a 31-year-old Irish woman, Roberta Murray. She's lived in Berlin 2.5 years. She has, I think, art exhibitions. She's got no criminal convictions. She has a basic right to settle and work anywhere in the EU because she's, you know, an EU national. She's Irish. She, along with 3 other pro-Palestinian activists from Ireland, Poland and the US, have faced deportation and a 2-year ban on re-entering Germany even before a legal appeal can be heard in court. And I mean, we've got through this whole episode without talking about the Overton window. Hurrah for us. But I do think that what is going on here, and it is kick-started, I guess, from the US, which has decided that if you want to ban people or deport people or get rid of them, you can do it. And by the time any legal, you know, action has been taken, it's too late. And Israel is pretty good friends, as we know, with Trump. You know, Netanyahu's in the White House today visiting his mate there. America being one of the few countries that will receive Israel because of the ICC, the International Criminal Court ruling against Netanyahu at the moment. And you sort of see this pattern emerging, which is, well, is that how we're going to is that how the world is now treating supporters of the Palestinian cause? A straight ban?
It is worth saying that, I mean, they were due to be visiting the West Bank as part of this delegation. And although, obviously, the world's focus has been on Gaza since October the 7th, Palestinian-Israeli rights group B'Tselem has documented some 64 airstrikes that have killed 261 Palestinians, including militants but also civilian casualties, and at least 41 miners in the West Bank since the 7th of October attacks. So the West Bank itself and what is going on there, which is exactly what these MPs were supposed to be going to visit and understand, is yet another centre of instability and bloodshed that basically we've been ignoring for obvious reasons.
And yeah, where journalists cannot get...
And where journalists cannot go.
I mean, you see what's happened in Gaza
Strip.
overnight when they're talking about the immolation of a Palestinian journalist who was, I think we understand, sort of burnt in his tent by rocket fire that was dropped there. We know about the case that was lied about just 2 weeks ago with the Red Crescent van and everything that has now come to light, a massive cover-up by the Israeli army. I don't think, from Israel's perspective, any of this looks good. Any of this is helpful. If you want the world to even begin to try and understand what you are doing now in Gaza or in the occupied territories, for God's sake, don't be heavy-handed about the kind of people you are allowing in to witness and to report and to talk about. That is parliamentarians' job. That is our jobs as journalists. It is rule number 1.
But I do think your point, Emily, about it's almost like everyone feels they've got licence to do this now because of Donald Trump. And, you know, it feels like everything in our lives, everything goes back to Donald Trump. And, you know, the fact that he is saying, well, I'd like to lock up my opponents, I'd like to treat my enemies like this, etc., etc. It is giving, you know, it's like we've got franchises now of Trump land and Trump rules around the world.
German flavour.
We've got a German flavour.
A little bit of, you know, red cabbage on the side.
Exactly, and we've got it on with hummus on the side in Israel, where they are doing this and thinking, you know what, we're not going to get any criticism from Donald Trump for being tough with these people. And I think it's a bad look for Israel, and I think it's a really bad look for Kemi Badenoch to have said, you know what, parliamentarians, bloody right, they shouldn't. Israel is absolutely right to stop them.
we banned Geert Wilders from coming here, the far-right Dutch politician. I mean, we do ban people from coming in. I guess the question is, well, what is the question? That you think his was hate speech, that he was coming here to spread hate speech?
I wouldn't have I wouldn't have banned him.
I think he overturned it in the end.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is there kind of is a precedent. There is precedent.
Well, I
for
suppose
this
if
sort of
you,
stuff.
look, if you think that someone's coming over, a hate preacher that is coming up to stir hatred and to stir,
And Israel would argue that he does think that they were trying to bring in or trying to spread the word of the boycott, diversity and sanction movement. In other words, trying to get people to stop buying Israeli-backed goods.
I think, though, as you say, Emily, there is a particular... Israel can do that if they want, but at a time when they have been making what has happened in Gaza as opaque as possible, uniquely. I mean, we don't talk about this enough, right? Like, uniquely for a global conflict. Uniquely, pretty much.
And for a democracy.
And for let alone in a democracy, not allowing journalists into a place where they are conducting a war for, 18 months or so. It's almost without precedent, really, or is without precedent. And as a result, the only reason we know about some of the things that have happened there is because of Palestinian journalists who are working in Gaza. But not to allow... So to have that, and then to start banning parliamentarians from fellow democracies, from a fellow ally, and we're not talking in these are two new, small n, Labour MPs, new Labour MPs, right? They are not known for being. It's
not George Galloway, is it?
It's not Galloway. It's not even Corbyn or someone like that. Who you might say, or even from the sort of new parliamentary grouping, which is sort of extremely pro-Gaza, anti-Israel, if that's the way you want to see it, right? These are pretty innocuous parliamentarians. So to send the message that they're not allowed...
I'm not sure I'd like to be called an innocuous
I'm
parliamentarian.
Sure I mean that...
They're under the radar at the moment, aren't they?
Well, they're not now. In the nicest possible way. They should be, in diplomatic terms, considered to be inoffensive, even if the Israeli government might find them annoying or irritating.
Yeah, but that's the point, isn't it? Even if they're not, even if they want to go and shout about things, to your point, just grow a pair.
Exactly.
Just invite people in who will criticise your country occasionally. That's not the worst thing that can happen.
It is not a huge deal, and yet Israel manages once again to get itself on the for a country that is so sophisticated in terms of understanding the importance of public relations and the need to win support, can sometimes do some bloody stupid things. We will be back tomorrow. We'll see you then. Bye bye.
For another innocuous show.
Exactly. Well, bland. Bye-bye. I think bland. Maybe.
Good. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.